Hi everyone, welcome to another Learn Live session where we will be going through the configuration of your Microsoft Sentinel environment. My name is Benjamin Kovacevic and I work as a product manager in our customer experience team covering Microsoft Sentinel. And today with me we have my colleague Matt.
Good day, everybody. We're happy to see you today. Thank you for joining us. And I'm, as Benji had mentioned, another Microsoft Sentinel product manager on the customer experience engineering team.
And as mentioned, going through the configure your Microsoft Sentinel environment today, they are part of our learning modules. One really important information is that we are currently in the process of updating these modules. So you will be some of the things that are new and that are not available currently in the Learn modules, but they will be updated really soon. So this is also one of the sneak peeks into the new and improved Learn module about configuring your Microsoft Sentinel environment. This is live and interactive session, so please feel free to say hi in the chat, ask any of the questions, and we will try to be really nice and answer on as many as we can during our presentation, and we hope that we will be able to learn together. So let's start. Let's start by introducing what actually Microsoft Sentinel is, so that we actually know what we will be configuring today. The learning objectives inside of the Microsoft Sentinel is to identify the various components and functionalities of Microsoft Sentinel, and also to identify the use cases where Microsoft Sentinel will be a good solution. So what is Microsoft Sentinel? So Microsoft Sentinel is actually a security information and event management solution, or as we know it as SIEM. And what actually SIEM is log management, first of all. So that is a place where we are bringing all the logs from all our different security solutions so that we have everything centralized, everything inside of the one pane. The second purpose is to create the alerts based on those logs. So if we see any anomalies, if we see anything that is unusual in the behavior, we want actually to get that alert up. And in Sentinel, you will see a lot of alerts that will be grouped inside of the incidents so that it is much easier for you to investigate. Then we want to visualize data so that we have different dashboards and reports so that we can actually go and drill down through those logs that we have. And those logs can be millions of records only in one table. We will have those incidents and we need a place where to manage it. So part of the SIEMs now is also the incident management tools so that we can actually update, assign and do the investigation of those incidents. We can query the data, which is in most cases using the rich query language, so that you can actually go and filter the data based on what you need. So what is actually Microsoft Sentinel in this case? Microsoft Sentinel is giving you opportunity to collect the data from all those different sources. It gets you options to analysis of those data and hunting through the data, do the investigation using the incidents, and also to respond using the automation actually. So Microsoft Sentinel, as we are mentioning, it is not only security information and event management system, it is also security orchestration automation response source system. And source system is giving us like that up notch just through the power of much better incident management, automation, and investigation perspectives. So as we mentioned, what is SIEMs? That is applying also what is Microsoft Sentinel. So it is that one bird eye view to all your data from all your different sources, and it is giving you opportunity to have that one view so that you can detect those sophisticated attacks even though we have increasing volumes of alerts and logs inside of our systems. And because of all the AI and machine learning that we are utilizing inside of the Microsoft Sentinel, we are also providing option to detect previously undetected threats and minimize false positives. And also to investigate those threats using the tools like investigation graph that we'll be introducing a bit later. And on top of that, we are adding that automation capability that is part of the SOAR so that we can easily and quickly respond to any of the threats actually found inside of our system. So now going to Matt to see what actually is Microsoft Sentinel and how it actually works.
Thanks, Benji. So I'm going to be covering over a lot of different topics for how Microsoft Sentinel works, and Benji is also going to be popping in to add to that as well. So when you're using a SIM, the most important aspect of a SIM is going to be the data collection. It's the lifeblood behind a SIM. You can't do anything else without the data. So when it comes to Microsoft Sentinel, there are several different ways to actually ingest that data through a multitude of different connectors. I believe the total count today is about over 200 data connectors that are offered. So for your on or your endpoint resources such as virtual machines, hosts, other devices that run an operating system, we can actually use our endpoint agent from Azure Monitor to collect those logs. So this is primarily going to be for those Windows devices you might have, or network devices and Linux devices that you might want to bring syslog and ceph logs from. For other sources that might not use an agent, that are maybe cloud hosted or a SaaS service, um, you can use API. So Microsoft Sentinel does support API ingestion, and so a couple examples of what that might be for threat intelligence coming from, say, a threat intelligence platform, Defender 365. So using the different Defender products, we can also ingest their data and their alerts through API. We have a newer platform called Codeless Connectors. So if you have platforms that you want to write a connector for and you don't want to have to host like an Azure function or an Azure Logic app for, you can actually use this Codeless Connector, which is going to deploy a connector to go grab that data that you're specifying, and you have full control over that configuration. Lastly, we do have integrations with Logstash. So if you are using Elk Stack or using Logstash just in particular, you can actually send that data through Logstash to your Microsoft Sentinel workspace. So a lot of flexibility, and that's a lot of the beauty behind Microsoft Sentinel's data collection, is that because it is cloud hosted, it is very flexible and very easy to get data sources into your environment.
Hey Matt, how hard is actually to create like first-party connectors?
Very
Is there
simple. Only a matter of clicks when it comes to Microsoft first party sources. But even with third party, it is also very simple, as we do provide, say, deployment scripts or easy to follow steps for setting up your third parties. And as you can
cool?
see in the sample screenshot here, just in this one environment, we have over 130 different connectors available with 40 already connected. And if I wanted to, I could just click on it, go through my steps, and get it configured and ready to go. So you might be wondering, well, okay, Matt, we're bringing in our data now. How does that look in terms of a day-to-day operation? So how that is going to be done is the data is going to be going into your Microsoft Sentinel environment, but actually it's going to be going first to an Azure Log Analytics workspace. So when using Microsoft Sentinel, that data is going to be in Azure Log Analytics, and you're going to connect the two services together to create that one environment. So by default, when using Microsoft Sentinel, you will be given 90 days of data retention for free out of the box for that data that you're ingesting. So, some Microsoft platforms might do 60 days. For Microsoft Sentinel, we do 90. But if you do need more, there is the option for extending that retention from 90 days up to 2 years in what we call the analytics tier or the hot tier for data. So, actively allowing it to be queried, used for detections, used for visualizations, and so on. And if you also have to have it up to a certain year for compliance purposes, we do have a newly announced archive tier, which allows for up to 7 years of retention now. Lastly, the data that is available for querying is going to be queried through the Kusto query language, or KQL for short. So that's the query language that Microsoft uses for a lot of different services. So Microsoft Sentinel, Azure Log Analytics, and also the Microsoft 365 Defender portal for hunting actually also uses Kusto query language. But don't fret for the data in archive. We do provide functionality in order to query that through what we call search jobs, which we'll be covering later in the learning module.
Sorry, Matt, for jumping in. I just saw a really nice question from the audience, and it is connected actually to data connectors, and asking like, can we connect the Azure Arc devices and bring the data from them?
Absolutely. That was a great question to whomever put that in the chat. So, Azure Arc devices can also have the endpoint agent installed on them. So, through the newer Azure Monitor agent, it actually works very seamlessly with Azure Arc devices. So, thank you for asking that.
Okay.
So, quick sample here of what it might look like to manage your log retention or your retention policy. So, you can manage it on the workspace level, but also on the table level. So, within the settings of your Azure Log Analytics workspace, you can actually see the retention that's currently set on each table. So, in this example, it's currently set to 1 year of retention, but on some of the tables that as we can see here, we also have an additional 1 year of archive on top of that if we wanted to. When querying, this is what the query experience looks like. So here you can see a little quick snippet of the KQL language, so Azure or the Kusto query language, and what the results might look like based on the query that I've put in. So, just a quick example of what that experience looks like. We also have a nice built-in feature called IntelliSense that helps you write your queries in KQL if you're still new to the language. Lastly, I talked a little bit about search jobs. If you were running a search job on data that's archived beyond your workspace's retention, it would look like this. So you're entering a keyword that you want to look for in that data, and it's going to go beyond your hot tier or analytics tier retention to go find that data for you. So, querying aside, you have your data. How can you use that data? One of the key aspects of a SIM is also the detections. You can't have security unless you're detecting threats based on the data that you're ingesting. And that's where analytic rules are going to come in for Microsoft Sentinel. So we today offer several different types of ways to detect threats and also bring in alerts and incidents. So the most commonly used analytic rule type is going to be the scheduled type. So the scheduled type is actually defined by you, the user, and you're going to specify what type of logic it should use for the query. So you're going to specify where it should look and how it should look at the data. You're also going to specify how often it should run. So say every 5 minutes, every hour, and then also you're going to specify the look back window of the data that you want to look at. So if you're running it more frequently, you can put the smaller chunks of data. But if you're running it less frequently, you could put larger chunks of data if you want. So within minutes, hours, days, and so on. Say you want to bring a detection in from one of your Defender products that you're currently using. We have something for that too. So for the Microsoft security analytic rules, these are actually going to be the alerts raised by the different Defender products, and they're going to get brought into Microsoft Sentinel. So you have that full coverage, that single location to find all those detections and have them ready to go. Now, say you might be looking at the analytic rules and say, well, scheduled sounds great, but how do I get it as near real time as possible? And that's where near real time analytic rules come in. So these are the same type of rules as scheduled, but you can run them more frequently as every minute. So if you want that near real time experience while using scheduled analytic rules, you can just use the NRT rules. We offer Fusion, which is machine learning that's going to take your detections and combine multiple alerts together based on similar information or relation. So it's actually going to take it from multiple services sources and narrow down that essential information for the detection and raise it to you as one consolidated incident that's going to have all the information you're going to care about. We also have machine learning behavior, very similar to Fusion, but this allows you to actually modify the settings and some of the weight behind the machine learning. So if you want to build a machine learning model and have that contribute to your detections for anomalies, we offer that today for you. Threat intelligence matching. So Microsoft threat Microsoft Sentinel does support threat intelligence ingestion. And so what this type of analytic rule is going to do for you is it's going to take the indicators of compromise that you're ingesting and is going to review your data to see where in your logs are we seeing your IOCs that you've brought in. So in the event that there is a match to say an IP that's been found to be malicious in your threat intelligence, we will actually raise an alert and notification for you saying, we found a match here. You should go take a look at it because we saw that in your threat intelligence feed. And then lastly, we have a type called anomalies, which is going to use machine learning to evaluate baseline behaviors for entities. So an account, an IP, a machine, and it's going to point out an anomaly that takes place for that item that we're looking at. So if a machine, say, um, kicks off a new process for the first time, that's an anomaly. A user signs into an endpoint for the first time that they never, they don't usually sign into. We'll point that out as well. So hoping to catch potentially malicious behavior at the start rather than a reactive approach. And when you go to the Microsoft Sentinel portal, or the Azure portal into Microsoft Sentinel, I should say, into the analytics blade, we actually offer hundreds of different out of the box built in templates for you to use today so that you don't have to start from scratch. So if you're new to Microsoft Sentinel and you want to see what we could do today for detections, we actually offer those hundreds of templates for you to use. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Benji, who is going to have some great insights into how you handle incidents investigations in Sentinel.
Yeah, thanks, man. Really, really great information. So now we have the data, we can query it. Now it's time for a fun. We created some alerts, and we have some of the alerts, so they are detected. What to do now? We need to go and actually start investigating it, start looking at that data, and we can actually do that inside of the Microsoft Sentinel itself using the incident management investigation space. For that part, we actually have three different views. So the first one is the incident page itself, which will contain all the list of the incidents that are detected, and it will contain options to filter and search for those incidents. So that we can search by owner, we can search by severity, various providers. We can check some of the incident summaries, respond to incident on demand using the automation. But also, if you want to collaborate with more people on the same incident, we can actually, from that same view, create Teams channel, which is really, really cool, a nice feature inside of the Microsoft Sentinel, so that you have that central space where you will be investigating that incident and sharing the ideas with a little bit more of the personnel inside of your SOC. Then we have the incident overview page. That is actually overview of the one incident that we open up, and we will see specifics only connected to that one incident. We will see entities connected to that incident and some basic information about those entities. Incident timeline with all the incident, alerts, data, bookmarks, if we are adding inside of it. Really cool feature called similar incidents that will give us, based on the entities detected and based on the analytic rule that we are using, if we have similar incidents that were happening before in the last 14 days, we will see the data around those similar incidents, and we will be able to see how they were treated, were they false positive, true positive. And we will also have the option to respond on the incidents. We can create Teams channel for efficient collaboration again. So all those information that we had on the incident page itself. Plus, we will have the investigation graph, which is actually our graphical incident investigation, where we can see connection between the alerts based on the entities that were detected. then those entities, if we see that they are malicious, we can automatically add them to our threat intelligence pane and write them inside of our threat intelligence indicators. Plus, also we have options to review the insights. We can add any connected alerts to the incidents, and it is really nicely visible inside of the system. So dotted line will be alerts that are not connected to the incident. Full line are the alerts that are connected to the incident. So if we take a look to our page, so this is our incident overview page, where we can actually see all those incident data that we spoke a little bit about, and we will be showing it later in the demo a bit more. And also the investigation graph, so we can see how we can make those connections based on the entities, and we can see the difference between dotted lines and full lines. We can see the timeline of the alerts that were happening, so that it is much easier, so that we can go and work on the incidents itself. Now, when we have the incidents, we start investigating those incidents. We maybe need to respond to those incidents. And what we can do inside of Microsoft Sentinel is to create automations. And part of the automations is actually automation rules and playbooks that are giving us that possibility to automatize some of the responses that we can do. So automation rules are giving us that central managed point to rule the automation inside of the Microsoft Sentinel. So based on the incident, based on the various conditions that we can utilize, like title, severity, statuses, entities detected, etc. We can see what the action will be. Will the action be to close the incidents, to change severity, to run a playbook? While the playbook can contain much more of the basic information, plus more of the actions that we can connect as for the first party, so to the third party systems, using the REST API, so that we can respond to anything that is happening inside of our environment.
So Benji, real quick, what would you say is your favorite automated playbook?
Oh, playbook, automated playbook. I need to choose among a bunch of my children. Not a fair question. But I will say that the adaptive card one will be, just because it is providing so many different options. And that powerful tool of adaptive cards together with teams can be utilized to streamline SOC analyst process, so that he can actually interact with the incidents directly from the team's chat or channel. So this is how actually automation rule will look like, so that we can actually maybe even try to zoom in a little bit, so that you can see how you can actually edit some of the automation rule, add some of the information inside of that automation rule, so that we are calling the conditions, and also adding the actions that can like change the status, or we can actually go and run a playbook from it. Or if we are speaking about the playbooks, we are using the power of the Azure Logic Apps for our playbooks. And I mentioned Teams adaptive cards, and I actually used the Teams adaptive cards in the demo itself to show it, and how we can actually go and utilize the power of the logic caps inside of the system itself, where we have the trigger, which is the first option, so Microsoft Sentinel incident, and then we have a bunch of actions. So when incident is detected, go through those actions, and based on those actions, we will respond. So I can actually here send the chat message to change the severity of inside of the system. The next really cool feature inside of the Microsoft Sentinel is actually UEBA, which stands for User Entity Behavior Analytics, and which is actually giving options to see some basic baselines around the users, in some bit more advanced baselines as well, so that thanks to machine learnings and anomalies that Matt mentioned when we were speaking about analytic rules. And actually, UEBA within Microsoft Sentinel provides some of the built-in insights around various entities, including accounts, hosts, IPs, IoT devices. So if you have connected Microsoft Defender for IoT, you will see insights about IoT devices and also Azure resources. So if there is any baseline needed to do around the Azure resources itself, it can be seen through the UEBA. So each of these items that will be detected, so each account, each host, each IoT device will actually have its own entity page where we'll have the highlights about that entity, some key information about it, see alert timelines that are detected based on that entity, and also see all the insights about it. Plus, we will have options to customize the timeline of activities based on interests. So you can actually, using the KQL that is used for our logs, to create any customized timeline that you want to see inside of the user entity page. And when we are speaking about user entity behavior analytics, this is like the first view. And when you click on any of the user, for example, this will be the view where we can see many different data. Plus the view that is covering actually the analytics. And if we zoom it in a little bit, we can see the entity settings page where we can actually add any activity and see many different activities that we have available inside of our system. So back to you, Matt, to speak about hunting and notebooks.
Thanks, Benji. Great stuff about automation. I know how much you're passionate about that topic. So let's move into
Yeah.
threat hunting and notebooks. So I talked a bit about the reactive detections, and Benji has introduced, how we reactively take action against an incident or an investigation. So I'm going to go over some concepts around proactivity and what you can proactively do within Microsoft Sentinel. So we have what we call threat hunting, or hunting for short, in the portal, that allows you to take the logs that you've ingested and actively run queries on them that is curtailed, in this case, to look for specific malicious behavior or activity that you might care about. So this is going to be possible through our out-of-the-box hunting query templates. So similar to analytic rules and automation, we do provide out-of-the-box hunting queries for you to use that you can filter down based on data source, based on attack, the MITRE tactic associated with the threat, and so on. We also have a feature called live stream, which allows you to actively run a query every single 30 seconds. That is going to allow you to see results as they come in. So if you suspect that malicious behavior is going on and you want to actively watch for it to be taking place, you can boot up a live stream, insert the query that would catch that behavior, and watch the results come in real time. Lastly, while you're hunting, you can create what we call bookmarks. So a notable event or an activity that you want to look into more, or could be a sign of malicious activity. So by bookmarking it, I can save it on the side for research. I can attach it to an existing incident, or I can even make the bookmark into a new incident. So manually creating an incident based on something that I had found proactively. Outside of these threat hunting queries in the hunting blade, you can perform hunting and other activities through notebooks. So Microsoft Sentinel does support Jupyter notebooks through the Azure Machine Learning portal. So by deploying the notebooks, in this case, you can run code to do threat hunting, enrichment, investigations, responses to incidents, and so on and so forth. Anything that you want to code, you can do so through notebooks. So that's a very powerful platform if you've worked with Jupyter notebooks before. And if not, we also provide out-of-the-box templates for notebooks. So as you can see here in the screenshot, I'm in the hunting blade, which is going to include a lot of these out of the box templates that I talked about, showing you the data source that it's applied to, the MITRE tactics that it's aligned with, the techniques that it might use. And as I run my queries, it's going to show me the number of results that I'm finding and allow me to pivot to those results if I wanted to. So as you can see from the titles, it's going to show you the type of malicious behavior that these hunting queries are going to be looking for. Here's an example of a bookmark. So as you can see on the left side, I'm looking over uh, some hunting queries and some blogs, and I find one in particular that I find interesting. And so I'm going to go ahead and create a bookmark that says, this is an item of interest, an activity of interest that I want to investigate further or make into an incident. So I'm going to create that bookmark, map out the important details of it, in this case, the account, the host name, and the IP address that was associated with it. And I'm going to go back to that on the side or escalate that to be an incident for investigation. In terms of notebooks, as you can see here, I'm in my templates gallery. So we recommend our newer users for notebooks to use the getting started guide for notebooks. But if you are more experienced notebooks and don't need a getting started guide, you can see we have some different notebook templates there for, say, Azure Synapse for running jobs, finding some potential credit scans on Azure Blob Storage, visualizing threats globally, guided investigation, the list goes on. So moving back a little bit into data ingestion, this is going to be about threat intelligence and watch lists in Microsoft Sentinel. So threat intelligence, as I mentioned earlier, you could bring in through API. We do have built-in connectors for both threat intelligence platforms and Taxi. So we do have that platform for bringing that threat intelligence in. And these common, the indicators of compromise that you're most commonly going to be bringing in are, primarily around IP addresses, URLs, file hashes that are being found globally as threats and potentially in your environment. So, you can incorporate those threat intelligence into our threat intelligence blade. I also talked about our threat intelligence matching analytics, where it's going to actively use the threat intelligence to find matches between the IOCs and your data. And we also have a different way of approaching threat intelligence or even just running comparisons of lists, which is a watch list. So rather than ingesting your threat intelligence through a feed, and you wanted to have more control over the information that you're uploading, we actually can do so through a watch list. So a watch list is a CSV file or a JSON file that you can upload to Microsoft Sentinel that's going to contain data that you want to have be converted into in a log format. So what I mean by that is if I have, say, a CSV file of trusted IP ranges or VIP users in my environment, or if I want to map which users are using which devices in my environment, I can create a CSV file or a JSON file of that information and then load it up into Microsoft Sentinel into a watch list. And from there, what I could do is either focus in on those VIP users, for example, in an analytic role, saying review say security events for Windows, Azure Active Directory sign-in logs for VIP users, and run a comparison of that data to my watch list to say, hey, are any of these VIP users in my watch list showing up in my data? Yes or no? I can go from there. Another commonly asked question is, can I use a watch list to cut down on false positives? You can. Again, if I have a list of, say, trusted IP ranges and there are incidents that come in within my range, that I can use that information for cutting down on my false positives and my detections. So a lot of flexibility and more control over a watch list, to have that flexible use case scenario for, say more true positives, less false positives, or running higher priority detections. So here's an example of our threat intelligence blade. So that's going to show, in this case, Microsoft identified indicators of compromise from one of my threat intelligence feeds, and it's going to show me the exact values of what these indicators of compromise are. So if I wanted to, I can use this for reporting, use this for matching analytic rules, or making my own detections and using it from there. In terms of watch lists, just a few templates that we provide out of the box. And as I mentioned, these templates are essentially just lists of static logs. So allowing you to convert external data into a log format through an upload. Lastly, I'm going to talk about workbooks, which is, a bit of my bread and butter here. So I spend way too much time building workbooks, but that's just how strong the platform is. So workbooks are provided by Azure Monitor and are a key component of Microsoft Sentinel, in my opinion, at least. So workbooks are going to provide you that flexible canvas for data analysis and interaction. And what I mean by that is that you can create visual dashboards that you can interact with the data, and it's all built on KQL. So if you have, a list of queries that you might want to run often, or you would like to visualize in a single location, that's where a workbook can come in. So, and if you also, let's say, like building Power BI dashboards, well, you can create similar dashboards in Microsoft Sentinel by using workbooks. Outside of just data visualization and interaction, workbooks can actually be used as interactive tools to perform tasks, such as investigating an incident while taking an action or configuring an environment to, potentially hunting for data for entities. And what I mean by that is, deploying, say, analytic rules or automation, you can actually do that through a workbook if you wanted to build that out. You can also, say, investigate an incident by running queries in a workbook, visualizing that data, and then running an automated playbook from a workbook. So you don't have to leave. It's all in one location. And lastly, hunting for data for entities, you can build out key telemetry or key activities that you look for in your environment for entities to say, this is something they should be doing, something they shouldn't be doing. You have that location. You don't have to build it out every time you want to run that query, which is very efficient. And if you go into your Microsoft Sentinel environment, or if you were to deploy it today, we do provide dozens upon dozens of out-of-the-box templates for you to use that you don't have to build yourself. It's just as simple as clicking on one and clicking save. And as you can see here, we've got a couple versions that actually have updates available. So you can see that we're constantly updating these out-of-the-box templates for you. So it's not like you're going to deploy it once and it's never going to be updated again. It's always being updated. And here's an example of one workbook, in this case, Azure Active Directory audit logs, showing some activity, some trends, and some visualizations for what's taking place in my environment, who might be doing it. And if I wanted to, I can click on any of these boxes to expand them, filter them, interact with my data, and so on and so forth. I'm going to pass it over to Benji, who's going to wrap a lot of the content that we've talked about into one nice solution package here with Content Hub.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So we covered a bunch of things now. So we spoke about data connectors, we spoke about analytical roles, automations, watch lists, workbooks, and like creating all of those can take time. And we sometimes want to do it a little bit more like faster. That's why we have a feature inside of the Microsoft called Content Hub. And what Content Hub is actually is grouping solutions together. So, for example, we are speaking about Palo Alto Firewall, or we are speaking about Cisco ASA, or first-party data like maybe Azure AD Identity Protection. So what we will do, we will go to the Content Hub, search for that specific solution that we need, and deploy the solution itself. That solution inside of itself will contain, in most cases, the data connector so that you can connect to that data source. It will contain a few analytic rules that you can utilize out of the box, sample workbooks that you can utilize for reporting, sample playbooks that you will be able to actually utilize against that solution. So if you are, for example, speaking about Palo Alto Firewall to add IP to the block list, or if we are speaking about Azure AD Identity Protection, maybe to block the user because he is compromised, but also adding some of the hunting queries that we can run, etc. So it will be everything that we spoke currently just pushed together into one solution from where it is really easy for you to deploy anything. And if you stay with us till the end, we will actually show the example how to deploy one of the Content Hub solutions. Content Hub can be found inside of the Microsoft Sentinel as everything else. And this is the look that you will see. And you can see that we can actually now have more than 228 different solutions inside of the Content Hub that you can utilize. And this list is just building up. For those who are fans of the CI/CD, fans of the code and want to deploy everything to the code, we actually have integrated future code repositories inside of the Microsoft Sentinel that is giving you possibility to connect directly to the GitHub or Azure DevOps and actually to pick up all the analytic rules, automation rules, hunting queries, parsers, playbooks, or workbooks from the repository and deploy to Sentinel. So you can do everything inside of the GitHub or Azure DevOps without any of the configuration for this content that we just mentioned from the Microsoft Sentinel and utilize it directly from the repositories. And that repositories is inside of the Microsoft Sentinel, as we mentioned. And here we can see how it actually looks like when we create the connection. We will see the last deployment status if it deploys, and we will see with what source we are actually picking up, from what branch and what content we are actually taking it. We can change the content. We can connect to multiple branches and multiple sources so that you can actually balance if you need to. And when to use actually Microsoft Sentinel. So it is a SIEM and SOAR solution. So what you want actually to utilize it and when to use it is when you want to collect the events data from various sources, and also you want to combine those sources to compare them to make better detections and incident investigation. If you want to perform security operations on the data so that you have better insights about how to identify suspicious activity. Matt mentioned his bread and butter, which is workbooks. So if you want to visualize your log data, like we mentioned, the data can have like millions of records, and workbooks actually can help you to visualize that really nicely, see statistics and see like if there is any mismatch inside of the statistics. Do anomaly detection so that if there is anything anomalous happening between the sources and ingestions, and we spoke about our anomaly detections as well, and you have anomalies that you can detect inside of the Microsoft Sentinel. Hunt to the data, really important aspect, really powerful using the notebooks or using threat hunting, which is outside of the box, and you have a bunch of threat hunting examples. But you can also utilize Sentinel to do the security incident investigation without leaving Sentinel environment to some third-party tools for the incident management, and also to automate the response to alerts and incidents. So we have the both triggers inside of the Microsoft Sentinel. So if you want to react on the alert itself or the incident that is happening inside of the Microsoft Sentinel. So let's see how you pay attention during this presentation for the first part and see some of the knowledge check. The first question is, what does Microsoft Sentinel provide? Is it a solution for checking your security posture in the cloud? Is it an end-to-end solution for security operations? Or is it a solution for securely storing keys and secrets in the cloud? So, Matt, what do you think? Is it maybe A?
I feel like asking me is cheating, though. I would hope that I would know the answer to this.
I don't know. Like, I'm just checking. Maybe you didn't listen to us.
I don't know. I kind of spaced out there. I think it might be A.
You might be A, or maybe even C. Like, maybe we can store some keys like inside of the log analytics. So actually, if we are going through the Microsoft Sentinel and what we were actually doing through the Microsoft Sentinel itself, and we hope that you had listened to us during our presentation, actually, what the correct answer here is, it is an end-to-end solution for your security operations. So, like we mentioned, Microsoft Sentinel will provide you that end-to-end solution so that you can work through your data. And let's go through the next question, which states, which language is used to query data within Microsoft Sentinel? And we mentioned actually already this during our introduction, I think even 2 times. So A, is it SQL? B, is it GraphQL? Or C, is it KQL?
I've seen KQL before. It's just SQL, right? We're just
Yeah,
using SQL.
you can try, but I think you will be getting some errors when you try to run this SQL. So the correct answer to this is KQL, which stands for Custom Query Language. Really similar to our SQL language, but it is just more optimized to support our cloud databases. And let's jump to the third question, which states, which Azure service stores the log data that is ingested into Microsoft Sentinel? So are we storing the data inside of the Azure Data Factory? Are we storing the data inside of Log Analytics? Or we are utilizing the Azure Monitor? This can be tricky, Matt. What do you think?
I'm going to go with the secret option of Azure Storage Account.
Azure Storage Account. Maybe that is even the answer. So in this case, we will go with B, which is actually the Log Analytics. And something that we will just show you actually is that when you are enabling actually and deploying Microsoft Sentinel, you will be deploying Microsoft Sentinel on top of the Azure Log Analytics, which is used to store that data. And the final question for this round is, within Microsoft Sentinel, which Azure product is used to run automated playbooks in response to alerts? Is it A, Log Analytics, B, Azure Monitor, or C, Azure Logic Apps? Okay, if I'm going through this, I think it will be cheating because I really love automation and enjoy it. We'll not try even to guess here, and we'll go straight to the answer, which is actually C, Azure Logic Apps. And we are utilizing the power of the Azure Logic Apps inside of our Microsoft Sentinel so that we are able to work on and actually to run the playbooks through the system because of the robust system of the Azure Logic Apps that is enabling us to connect to many different first-party and third-party tools using the REST API. So in this module, we actually identified the various components and functionalities of Microsoft Sentinel, and we identified a few of the use cases that can be really good when you are thinking about utilizing Microsoft Sentinel. If you want to learn more about the introduction to Microsoft Sentinel, you can go through this article, Learn Live article, and you can scan the barcode quickly. If you are not fast enough, sorry, we need to continue. And we will continue with how to create and manage Microsoft Sentinel workspace. Matt, back to you.
Thanks, Benji. For the sake of time, I am going to go a little fast, so I apologize, but this is going to be recorded. So this just gives you more incentive to go back and go through everything that we've talked about today. So this next portion is going to also be very heavily detailed, a lot of information. So bear with us as we go through it, and if all goes well, we'll have some nice demos for you at the end. So the learning objectives for the second module that we're going to be presenting today are to describe Microsoft Sentinel workspace architecture, which we've touched a little bit about in the first part, install Microsoft Sentinel on a workspace, and then lastly, options for managing your Microsoft Sentinel workspace. So in this case, we're like I mentioned, we're going to just be going through the architecture, the process of setting that up, connecting Microsoft Sentinel, and also managing it. So before you even start with deploying any type of resources in Azure, as an organization or as a security team, you should be evaluating and planning ahead for what that workspace and what that architecture might look like. What I mean is, in this case, do you have, say, one tenant that you want to have with one Microsoft Sentinel instance? You want a single tenant with multiple Microsoft Sentinel instances? Do you have multiple tenants within your organization where you're going to have multiple Microsoft Sentinel instances that you'd be managing? These are all important questions from a management and design aspect, but there might also be some other factors to consider when looking over this. Outside of just your tenant and your environment, you might also have external factors such as compliance based on the region that you're located in. Say if you want to split up your data based on teams, so uh, blocking down data access amongst those who might be contributing data. And lastly, if you want to split up your billing instead of having one bill, you want to bill by team, you might also want to have to consider that going into your design. So, starting with the single tenant, single workspace, this is going to have the one Microsoft Sentinel instance as serving as the one location for your security operations. So, this is going to be one of the more easy approaches and designs to an environment and a deployment, as the single tenant and single subscription, single workspace, single everything is going to have everything in your environment in one location that's easy to manage when it comes to a lot of different factors. And those factors might be, say, if you want a central pane of glass, if you want to increase your efficiency by having everything in one location, that single workspace, single tenant is going to be the best bet for that. Consolidating all of your information to that one location, so that one workspace, you're not splitting the data. Easy to query all information, so you don't have to use any type of cross workspace queries. If you want to have just one location to apply all of your Azure RBAC settings for, in this case, the data or to Microsoft Sentinel, you have that single location to do so. By splitting it up, it might be a little bit more complex. Though the cons to using a single tenant, single workspace in this case is it might not meet your data governance requirements. So I talked a little bit about compliance. If you have that single workspace in, say, the United States, you might be missing out on, say, data compliance for Europe or any other region of the world. And if you're, say, operating out of multiple regions and you have everything in, say, the United States, you might also incur those bandwidth costs for ingress egress when sending data across regions. And lastly, you lose that ability to split up the billing a little bit because it's going to be all on one bill for that one subscription. But you might be hearing the single workspace, single tenant, single everything, and might be thinking to yourself, well, okay, well, what if I split it up? And that's where the single tenant with the regional workspaces comes in. So what that's going to look like is you have one tenant, but say multiple subscriptions or one subscription with multiple resource groups, basically splitting up your security operations to different regions, for your potential reasons for that. And those reasons could be any of those reasons that I highlighted on the single tenant, single workspace slide. So what that looks like here is on the left side, we have the single tenant, single workspace option. But if I want to compare that to the single tenant, single subscription, multiple region option, you can see that there on the right. So we can see that we have split up our data into two workspaces, two resource groups with two different Microsoft Sentinel instances. So that's going to allow me to split up the billing, split up data residency, governance, RBAC, and allow me to almost lock down my environment even more if I really wanted to. And you might be concerned about how that's going to integrate with itself, across multiple Sentinel instances. And it's actually very easy, as we provide cross query or cross workspace queries to allow you to query multiple workspaces from a location. Workbooks and analytic rules can operate for multiple Microsoft Sentinel instances. Uh, Data connectors you can split if you really wanted to, and so on and so forth. So we offer options to make multiple Sentinel instances as easy as possible. When looking at the pros and cons for that, you're looking at no cross-region bandwidth costs. So I talked a little bit about that ingress egress. You may be required for those data governance requirements. So compliance, looking at GDPR, anything like that, you are now compliant while still operating in multiple regions. You have that lockdown granular data access per region per user. You might also want to lock down the workspace for retention of the data. So you might have one region that requires more than 90 days, and you might have a region that doesn't need more than 90 days. And lastly, talking about that split billing, if you want that granular billing based on who is contributing that data and what region, that allows you to flatten that out a little bit more. The cons, though, is that your efficiency might take a little bit of a hit since you are accommodating for multiple workspaces on multiple instances. But as I mentioned, we do provide plenty of features for you to adjust and still remain efficient with multiple instances. Though the trade-off there is that any type of built-in AI or machine learning models that Microsoft Sentinel uses, it is not going to take into consideration another workspace. It's going to generate its models based on the workspace that it's attached to. So you're not going to have that full picture that you might want from a single workspace or single instance. So I'm going to pass over to Benji to talk a little bit more about multi-tenant and what that might look like in comparison to single tenant.
Thanks, Matt. So Matt went through some of the examples when we need to actually utilize like single tenant, but we need to have like one or multiple Microsoft Sentinel workspaces. But what if we have actually multi-tenant workspaces? So if we are actually utilizing multi-tenancy and we need to work with it, you can implement the multi-tenancy using the Azure Lighthouse. And Azure Lighthouse will actually give us the possibility to manage both of the workspaces, give the permissions between those workspaces, and actually also give options that we can query data across workspace, even the cross tenant, when we give the enough permissions. Because Azure Lighthouse is actually giving us that option, giving the permissions that we can work on both of the tenants, utilizing only one of the tenants. So this is example actually how the multi-tenancy actually looks like. So we have tenant A, tenant B, and tenant C. And if we actually need only to have multi-tenancy between tenant A and tenant B, we can utilize it. If we need to add tenant C as well, we can do that. So only in Azure Lighthouse, it is actually needed that we create those ARM templates that will be deployed. So if the tenant A is the main one, from where we will be actually working on the different data from other tenants. From tenant A, we will create that ARM template with all the permissions and deploy those permissions to tenant B and tenant C, which will apply the permissions that we need, and then we can go and query the data, see the incidents from the various systems, and see it like all in one view. But also like how to actually decide. That is the question that we hear a lot, isn't it, Matt? Like how to decide actually where to go, how to decide what is it, like single tenant, multi-tenant, or anything. And one thing that we actually have created, one of our colleagues in the team that works with me and Matt, is the Sentinel decision tree that is available inside our docs. So Matt, if you can pass the link so that everybody can reach it. And what actually we can do here is, following these steps, see, do we actually need one Microsoft Sentinel workspace or multiple Microsoft Sentinel workspaces? And we just need to go through the diagram and follow the steps. So, okay, do we have an existing workspace or not? If we have the existing workspace, is all data inside of that workspace that will be utilizing with Sentinel? If yes, just enable Microsoft Sentinel on top of it. If no, then create the new Log Analytics workspace and then apply Microsoft Sentinel on top of it. Do you have any regulatory compliance? Do you have multiple Azure tenants? Do you need a split billing or chargebacks, etc.? So as you are going through those steps, you actually can get all the information that can help you with the decision at the end. Really useful resources that you can utilize when you are doing the initial Microsoft Sentinel investigation. And now, let's go back to Matt and just try to understand the permissions and roles, which are really important when we are speaking about Microsoft Sentinel.
Thanks, Benji. So I talked a little bit about in my section the RBAC and narrowing it down by region or by instance and so on and so forth. So in this section, I'm going to highlight exactly what those roles might look like and how you can specify which ones should be used in your environment. So since Microsoft Sentinel is provided in the Azure portal, it is going to utilize the Azure RBAC roles that are provided out of the box when you set up Azure. In this case, for Microsoft Sentinel, we have 4 main roles. These are going to be reader, responder, contributor, and automation contributor. And what these roles are going to do in this case are reader, you're just going to be able to review and query the data, look at incidents, look at what workbooks are in the that are deployed, go into the workbooks and look at what's in them, and other Microsoft Sentinel resources. So they'll be able to view things, but they won't be able to write to anything that might be sensitive or things that they shouldn't be touching. We also have the responder role. So in this case, it's going to have everything that the reader has, but in this case, they're going to be able to manage incidents. So create incidents, close incidents, update them. So giving them that dedicated responder role to where they can work with the data, they can use it for investigations, and then update the incidents as needed. Microsoft Sentinel contributor in this case, again, similar to what the two above, but this is going to have the right permissions added to that role. So they're going to be able to uh, write data connectors or deploy data connectors in this case, create their own workbooks, deploy workbooks that might exist, create analytics, deploy analytics that might exist, all the way through automation. So they have the full permissions to configure, set up, and deploy Microsoft Sentinel. The last in this case is automation contributor, which in this case it's very specific to automation. So this role was added to work with the automated playbooks and also the automation rules, so that when running the automation rules, Microsoft Sentinel has enough permission, or the user has enough permission to run that automation. And what that might look like, I'm going to quickly try to get through this. Is because Microsoft Sentinel resides in Azure, there are other RBAC roles for the services that Microsoft Sentinel is going to use. So there are roles for, say, Azure Log Analytics, Azure Monitor, Azure Machine Learning, and lastly, like Azure Logic Apps that can also be applied or combined with the out-of-the-box Microsoft Sentinel permissions. So what that might look like, in this case, if you're working with playbooks to automate responses, you can also add to the Microsoft Sentinel contributor is the Azure Logic App contributor. So if you have somebody who needs to create or deploy logic apps, or in this case, the playbooks that we use, you can add that to the Microsoft Sentinel contributor role. Additionally, if you're using the automation rules, so that's going to use that automation contributor role. In this case, Microsoft Sentinel is going to be using a service account rather than an identity account. So that role in particular is going to be assigned to that service account that Microsoft Sentinel is going to be using for automation. And so that's actually the service is going to be getting that permission and RBAC assigned to it. So a little bit of a distinction there, something important to note. Another thing to keep in mind when deploying and configuring Microsoft Sentinel is that there might be data sources within the connector gallery that requires tenant level permissions. And the most common example of that you're going to see are the Microsoft services that might reside in another portal. So for example, Office 365, now known as Microsoft 365, or say the Defender products. So if you're setting up those connectors, configuring the environment to bring in data from those data sources, you will need tenant level permissions such as global admin or security admin to be able to start bringing that data in. you have the ability for guest users, if you're going to assign them incidents. In this case, if you assign a guest user an incident, then they can be given the Microsoft responder role or the reader role in order to be able to see them. Uh, but the user will also need to be assigned, in this case, the role of directory reader. This is another tenant level role that's going to be assigned. Additionally, if you have somebody who needs access to workbooks but doesn't need to have access to Sentinel, there is the uh, Azure Monitor roles in this case of workbook contributor. So if you want to isolate them from the Microsoft Sentinel environment, there are options within Azure Monitor, like Azure Monitor workbook contributor, to give them permissions to build their own or see ones that you've deployed and go from there. Other roles to keep in mind in the general Azure environment are going to be the owner, contributor, and reader roles. So these are generic and are going to apply to every service in the environment, not just Microsoft Sentinel. So keep in mind that if you assign someone those roles, it's ambiguous to Azure services. They'll be able to see more than what you might want them to see. Then lastly, I talked a little bit about the Azure Logic Apps, or in this case, Log Analytics roles. Um, if you have somebody who needs to be able to write queries and read the data, you can use Reader. But if you have somebody who wants to write functions for KQL or anything else within Log Analytics, you can give them the contributor roles. So just a quick uh, table here to show you the key functionality someone within a SOC might need and how that applies to Microsoft Sentinel's permissions. So in this case, we have the create and run playbooks. You can see the contributor and logic app contributor role allows for that. Create and edit workbooks and a lot of the other content in Microsoft Sentinel. You can see contributor or contributor with logic app has that. Manage incidents, starting with responder, but going to the lowest level of view data and everything else in Microsoft Sentinel, the reader will have access to that. I'm going to pass it over to Benji to talk a little bit about custom roles in the event that you want to build your own.
Yeah, so this is great, Matt. Like having all those built-in roles gives you a lot of options and easy just to assign them. But sometimes we actually need to create our own roles with our own permissions. And what we can actually do is utilize the option inside of the Azure itself that is giving us option to create that role on our own. So we can actually start from the scratch. And here on the screenshot, you can actually see those different options. So do we want to start from the scratch? And do we want actually to clone a role or even utilize the JSON? Those who are a little bit more familiar with the Azure and RBACs, they can utilize the JSON and deploy the ARM from it. So the clone role is like really nice if you actually need like Microsoft Sentinel responder role, plus you want to apply a few more roles, and you can actually go and just add any of them inside of it. It is easy fix, just to clone so that you don't add all the roles that Microsoft Sentinel responder have, plus those like 3 or 4 that you need. You can clone a role or start from scratch if you just need explicitly what you want inside of your organization. Really, really powerful tool. So now we went through the permissions. We went also through some of the important data when it comes to like deciding how our Microsoft Sentinel environment should look like. So let's see how we actually can create a Microsoft Sentinel workspace. When we want to create a Microsoft Sentinel workspace, of course, I mentioned first we need to decide how our design will look like. Because once when you enable Microsoft Sentinel on top of the log analytics, you cannot move that log analytics to another region. Or better to say you can, but it will break all the connections that you actually have created, and you will need to recreate the content inside of the Microsoft Sentinel. And also we recommend that when you are creating, actually, that you are utilizing some of the naming methods that will maybe include Sentinel, because many organizations are utilizing the log analytics workspace for many different storing of data, and we actually want always to know what is actually our Sentinel. Let's be proud with it. when we want actually to create and configure log analytics workspace, which is where we are storing the data. So we are utilizing log analytics workspace to store all the data, to like whatever is ingested is stored inside of the log analytics workspace. And then we are enabling Microsoft Sentinel on top of that log analytics workspace so that we can do wonders with that data, utilizing KQL, utilizing our automation, the AI and ML on top of it. But when we are creating and configuring the log analytics workspace, we actually first need to select the subscription where we want to deploy it. Then we need to select the resource group or create new resource group if we want. In many cases, we suggest people to create their own security subscription and create everything inside of that security subscription because of the permissions that Matt was going through. So if somebody else has some log analytics permissions for some other log analytics, we want maybe to isolate it to our own subscription. It will be much easier to work with it, name it. I already went through that. And also the region. The region is important because that is where actually we will save, that data will be saved to that location. So is it like in US, is it in Europe, in Asia, etc. So the region is important when you are configuring it. This is the view that we can see so when we are creating it. And this is actually that configuration that I mentioned. So we are choosing the subscription, the resource group, the name, and the region where we are deploying. So this screenshot is done by Matt. That is why it is West US. For me, it will be West Europe. So compliance reasons. So this is how we are actually creating it. And we just click on create, and that will create our log analytics workspace. Once when we have the log analytics workspace, there is no installation of Microsoft Sentinel. You don't need VMs. You don't need anything. You just need that log analytics workspace where you are storing the data, and then you will just enable Microsoft Sentinel on top of that log analytics workspace. What you will actually need is proper permissions. So you will need contributor permissions on the subscription in which Microsoft Sentinel workspace resides, so that you can actually deploy Microsoft Sentinel as a solution. To use Microsoft Sentinel, you will need either contributor or reader permissions on the resource group that workspace belongs to. And Matt went in details about like what kind of permissions and everything you will need to do. But also when you are enabling the data connectors, you might need other permissions to connect to specific data sources. Because if you are connecting to the Azure AD or Microsoft 365 Defender, we will actually need additional permissions that are connected to the Microsoft 365, which is Azure AD roles, and not RBAC controls that are connected to the Azure. But the great thing is whenever you open our data connector, you will actually see the exact permissions that you will need when you are deploying it. So when you want to add Microsoft Sentinel to the workplace, you will just click. So you will search for Microsoft Sentinel inside of the Azure portal. Once when you open Microsoft Sentinel, you will select that log analytics workspace, and you will add Microsoft Sentinel to the workspace. When you go to the Microsoft Sentinel, you actually don't need to have log analytics already deployed. So when you open up, you can create log analytics workspace directly from the Microsoft Sentinel environment. This operation will take like few minutes, not even few minutes, like it will be like a minute or two at most, that it creates, deploys, and you will just click on add button and be ready. So from creation of log analytics workspace to deployment of Sentinel and to get inside of the Sentinel view, it shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes actually. So this is the view when we are adding the Microsoft Sentinel inside of our environment, and let's make it easier just to zoom in. So this is some of the log analytics workspaces that we have that don't have Microsoft Sentinel on top of it. So we can click on create new workspace to create it and create from scratch, or we just can select any of already pre-existing ones and start deploying Microsoft Sentinel on top of that log analytics workspace. And really important information is when you are deploying and deciding on which log analytics workspace to deploy, is to consider the Microsoft Sentinel workspace that we'll be using. If we are sharing the data and the same data will be utilized in many workspaces, maybe we can save cost if we save everything into one and enabling it. And also think about if we are utilizing Microsoft Defender for Cloud, so that we actually utilize the same log analytics workspace for Microsoft Defender for Cloud and Microsoft Sentinel. Because any of the machines that we connect to Microsoft Defender for Cloud, we are getting allowances of 500 megabytes for certain data that you are ingesting into Sentinel. That includes a really important table when we are speaking about Microsoft Sentinel from the Windows machines, that is security event table. So this is really, really important one. Let's go back to Matt and go through how to manage Microsoft Sentinel settings.
So you've created your log analytics workspace. You've now connected Microsoft Sentinel, and now you're in. So, in the first part of the presentation today, we talked about all the different content that you could deploy, how you should start with data connectors and go to the analytics next. But in the event that you're looking to set up the different options for managing your Microsoft Sentinel workspace, we do have options for that today. And so what that looks like and you can see on my screen here, we do have a settings blade that is going to allow you to go through the different components of Microsoft Sentinel that is configurable for management. So within the setting view, you're actually going to get the option to configure and enable UEBA, so those user entity behavior analytics, turn on anomalies for your environment. So if you're looking to have machine learning, supplement your detections and your findings. If you want to begin configuring your playbook permissions, so applying the automation contributor role to specific automation that needs to run. If you want to turn on health monitoring, so if you want to find health logs from Microsoft Sentinel around data connectors, if they're being changed or if they're failing, analytic rules, if they're running or if they're failing. And then lastly, we just added automation if it's running, if it's failing. So if you want to monitor the health and the performance of Microsoft Sentinel, you do have that option with our settings here today. If you're looking to also configure different options within the Azure Log Analytics workspace, the example here, which underlined in red, is going to show you exactly what you could do. So the most common areas of the settings within Log Analytics that you're going to be looking at as a user of Microsoft Sentinel is around agents management and legacy agents management. So deploying and configuring the endpoint agents for data ingestion from your endpoints. Custom logs, if you want to bring in custom logs from, say, a file path, a device, a directory, a location, anything like that, you can do so through custom logs. Tables, which I showed earlier around the table and data retention, that's going to allow you to modify the workspace retention, the table retention, and we're going to talk a little bit about ingestion tiers here in a bit. And lastly, you're going to look at the usage and estimated costs if you want to see just the cost for log analytics, not including Microsoft Sentinel, or if you want to, in another location, expand the workspace retention beyond the 90 days. So let's jump into configuring the logs here. So you might be, wondering, okay, uh, I want to bring data in, but what are my options? And we've talked a little bit about all the different methods of data collection. And what we mean actually by configure logs here is about how they should be stored. And what I mean by that is what tier of data do I want to use most often? So we have the analytics tier, which in this case is the hot tier. It's available for querying the data. It's available for detections of data, workbooks, and so on and so forth. We have what is called basic logs, which is the consider it like a cold tier. So it's a lower cost ingestion method for your data. It has less retention time. Instead of 90 days, it's 8 days. But it gives you that ability to go look at the data when you want it, query it, and then have it move away if you don't necessarily need it for security purposes. And then we have what we call archive. So the archive tier, as it says in the name, is an archive tier. So when the data hits that, say, 90-day mark in analytics tier, the 8-day mark for the basic tier, rather than that data being removed from the workspace entirely, you can actually pivot it to the archive tier. And what that's going to allow for is that data is going to be kept in your workspace. It's not going to leave, it's not going to go to another Azure service. It remains in Azure Log Analytics and is going to be available for querying through search jobs and what we call restore jobs. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So analytic logs, the analytics tier that I've talked about is the default tier for data ingestion when you start enabling connectors. So as soon as you turn on data, it's going to come into that hot tier, that analytics tier. You're going to have full ability to use that data within Microsoft Sentinel. So you're going to still have it for queries, detections, uh, workbooks, notebooks, so on and so forth. Nothing's going to change. We're not hiding anything there. If you wanted to change that, you have the ability to change logs to a basic tier if it's a one of these supported tables, and that's not going to be enabled by default. You have to go and set that up yourselves. That way, you're not getting stuck, you're not getting trapped into a tier you might not necessarily want to use. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Benji to talk about basic logs.
Yeah, so Matt already mentioned analytic logs, so that logs that you have actually the security value that you want to store inside of your Microsoft Sentinel for longer period of time and be able to query it for longer period of time and compare it with other data. So you can have it like by default up to 90 days inside of the Microsoft Sentinel, free of additional cost of retention. But sometimes we want to bring that some of the data inside of the Microsoft Sentinel workspace that doesn't have that much of security value. We don't need like full Sentinel benefit on top of it, but then it is too expensive to bring us that data and we need to leave it in some separate space. So actually, we introduced for those specific data basic logs that is giving us option to ingest data on that it will be on the cheaper level, but also it will be only retained for 8 days inside of the Microsoft Sentinel, and we will have limited KQL functionality when we are doing the querying of that data. So if we are speaking about KQL limits, there is a subset of the queries that we can use, and you can see the list on the screen. So we can use some of the basic ones. Still powerful queries can be done there, but you cannot do like advanced KQL querying on top of the basic logs. So you can use there to extend the data to project or project away or any kind of the project. Parse the data. So if you need to parse it so that you have a better visualization of the data when you are querying it, and also union so that you can union actually basic logs with any other logs. That is what is currently available from this perspective. But also it is important to say, like after that 8 days, we can send the data to archive logs. So if you need to store it for compliance reasons, it is possible. So just after 8 days, we will send it to archive logs for like a year, 5 years, 7 years, up to 7 years. And there are certain tables that we are currently supporting for the basic logs. So we are not supporting the whole subset of the tables that are inside of the Microsoft Sentinel, but only subset of those tables. So what we are actually supporting is all tables created with the data collection rules, so DCR, custom logs API. In something that will hear when you speak with Microsoft Sentinel people, that is custom logs v2. So when we say custom logs v2, these are the tables that we are speaking about. So custom logs v1 that are using the current API method of ingestion are not supported, so only the new method. Also, we are supporting container log v2 and app traces logs. If we want to configure what kind of log type we actually want, we are doing that using the tables inside of the log analytics workspace settings, what Matt already showed. So you select tables, you select three dots and ellipse at the end of the row, select manage, and changing the table plan. So what it actually looks like is here. And let's zoom in again. So we are going to the tables inside of our login settings, selecting the one of the tables. So in this case, I'm using the Apache Access custom logs, which is actually custom log v2. In this case, and I have option to go and change, do I want analytics or the basic logs? And I just click save after I change the settings. We can also configure the log retention inside of the Microsoft Sentinel, and we have two log retentions inside of the Microsoft Sentinel. So log retention as log retention that is up to 730 days, and archived logs, which is the topic that we'll be speaking a little bit later, so in like a couple of minutes. But like if we want to enable log retention for more than 90 days, we actually will be doing it, and up to 90 days it's free. More than 90 days we are paying for the retention. So if we want to change that retention, we actually go to Microsoft Log Analytics in this case, and we will go to usage and estimated costs to the data retention, and we will be changing the data retention days. So you will be choosing between 30 days and 720 days. So now jumping back to Matt to speak about the new archived logs.
And I think this is going to be the last topic for today's session.
Yep.
But at any point, you can always join us for future sessions or refer to the public documentation. And as Benji mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be updating the learning content. So stay tuned for that as well to find the remainder of the topics that we might not be touching on today. So, well, there we are. I went ahead a little bit. So if you're looking to keep your data for an extended amount of time beyond, say, the hot tier of 2 years, we have the archive tier of up to 7 years, which we've talked a little bit about throughout today's sessions. So what that's going to do is, as I mentioned earlier, as soon as the data hits the end of the retention policy, say the 90 days, the 2 years, it will actually automatically pivot to the archive tier if it's configured to be archived. So there is a little bit of user input in this case to configure which tables should be archived. We do not enable archive on all tables by default. So you get to pick and choose which tables should be archived and for how long. So right now, the maximum is up to 7 years. As we move along with the feature, it might expand to say 10 years or more years. So, just a nice visual to show the interactive period. In this case, the data and analytics tier, the data and hot at the end of the retention policy, moving to that archive period that could still be queried and brought back in as needed through search jobs and restore jobs, which unfortunately we won't get to today. When you're looking at configuring tables and logs for archive tier, that is going to be done through the same method that Benji had just shown by going to that tables blade within the Azure Log Analytics workspace, choosing the table and choosing manage, which is going to bring up the view that you see on my screen here. So once you bring that up, you can see that there's an option for the interactive retention period. That's going to be the period in hot. And then the total retention period is how long the data should remain in the workspace. So rather than just spelling out how long it should be in archive, you're actually going to say how long the data should be interactive, in this case queryable, and in hot in the analytics tier. And then the total is going to represent the total amount of time that the data will be in the workspace. So that's going to take hot plus archive in order to find the total. So in this case, as you can see in the example, 3 years is my total. So it's going to take that difference between the 3 years and 180 days to provide the archive period of 915 days. So that's how you would go about doing it in your environment. And so with that, we are at the end of our content for today. So I'll hand it back over to Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. It is really, great to go through this session and to learn so much about Sentinel. I hope that everybody enjoyed as I did, speaking around it. But we just want to say that this is not the end of the sessions from the Learn Live team. Don't miss our next session, that is designing container build strategy, that will be on October 31st from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. Please register and learn more about designing container build strategy. Thank you everybody for joining. Have a wonderful day.